Download the free Book Lovers Trail Te Arakai Puka Puka audio app and start your literary journey along State Highway 2, from Wellington through the Wairarapa and into the Hawke's Bay, one bookshop at a time. Download the app now from the Apple Store, Google Play Store or the web app. More info at www.booktown.org.nz.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ayubowan, whanakam. Thank you all for coming today to our panel, Swimming Upstream, the Rise of Sri Lankan Writing in Aotearoa. It is my pleasure to introduce you to these incredible writers and my friends, Saraid de Silva, Romesh, Dissanayake, and Brannavan Gnanalingam. Before we kind of get started into some of the questions, I would like for them to all introduce each other. So, Bran, if you could introduce Saraid, introduce Romesh, and Romesh, Bran.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I will introduce Saraid. I found out about this about 5 minutes ago, so we'll improv on the spot. But Saraid is an incredible novelist with her book Amma, which came out last year, along with a podcaster and scriptwriter and multi-talented person in general. Amma is an incredibly affecting novel about 3 generations of women. Covers the globe, covers Aotearoa history. It's been longlisted for the Women's Prize, which is a massive deal. It's also been longlisted for the Ockham Book Awards. Should have been shortlisted, and you should all read it because it's an incredible book.
Yeah, that was cool. I like being intro by my friends. Tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, I am Saraid, very happy to be here in Featherston. Romesh and I think, actually have a real meet cute because we are right next to one another in A Clear Dawn, which is an Asian anthology of writers, from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I saw his name next to mine in the book and I was like, that's a Sri Lankan. And that was really fun. Romesh is an amazing novelist and a poet, and he has recently moved over to Nam, which is incredibly sad for us here, but also necessary in so many other ways for Romesh. And he wrote a book called When I Open the Shop, which came out last year, which is so beautiful and very so much nostalgia and heaviness on every page, but it goes into you in a really calming way, which I think is quite a difficult thing to achieve. And he is also in the latest AUP Poets collection. And he's my friend.
Kia ora koutou, ayubowan, whanakam, maginame Romesh, dissanayake. Bran really needs no introduction. He is a lawyer, a novelist, ex-film reviewer. I don't know if you're still doing that. He's written 8 novels, and his latest is called The Life and Opinions of Kartik Popat. Brannavan's probably single-handedly pushed the conversation of POC people in this country. I remember in 2017 or 18, I came across his name at a book festival, and it was just so incredible to see another Sri Lankan in my city writing about the issues that I was going through, and the places where I grew up. So he's a legend to me, and also he helped a lot with my writing. He was a mentor while I was writing my book, and I think that's all I can say. I'm sure you're all familiar with his work.
Thanks, guys. I knew they would all say things that they would be too humble to say of themselves, so that was really special. So for Saraid and Romesh, their recent books, Amma and When I Open the Shop, are their debut novels. Bran's written 100 million novels before this. So what's it been like for all of you at your different stages in your career to complete a book? What was life like while you were writing your book and then publishing it, then kind of going into that frenzy of promoting it, and then now, like a year later, what's that process been?
My book kind of rushed out because it was. It's about the rise of the far right and fascism, and I had a feeling that it could be relevant, and so I thought I'd get it out as quickly as I can. And I work with a publisher that has a really effective model in that as soon as the book is ready, we can hit print, and so we can effectively have the book out the following day after it's kind of finished with the editing. And in fact, we've fixed typos while we're printing, which has terrified many other writers. And so we were like, oh, the book's ready, let's get it out. And so we got it out in October last year. And I started writing it March last year as well. So it kind of just came out in an absolute splurge. But it is my 8th novel. I have kind of a clearer sense of how to write a book, which I think takes a bit of time for new writers to get used to or to feel confident that they could do it. And so that definitely helped just getting it out. This guy's voice is such a toxic voice, such an ugly voice, that I just wanted to get it out of my system as well as quickly as I could. And so that definitely influenced my, I guess, the speed of that book. But I kind of became a writer by accident, so this is all kind of unplanned. I have no real clear sense of how you become a writer. I just simply wrote a book when I was 23, travelling, and got lucky to be published, and then it's kind of been going from that.
Oh yeah, it was cool to hear from you first, Bran, about that, because I think obviously your experiences will be so different to me and Romesh's. I kind of kept thinking about how life rudely doesn't stop for me to write a book. Like, I think I lived in like maybe 4 or 5 different places while I was writing Amma. I had a car crash and got a really bad concussion, and I had to edit the book with 9 fingers because this one was broken, which was quite hard. And also, like, my brain didn't work very well for quite a bit. And then kind of since it's released, I don't know, I cried a lot, like, right before I started talking to people about it. I'm, like, chronically bad at talking about things while they're in process, and, like, very hostile to friends who ask kindly about how the book is going. So then I think, like, the day before I, like, shared the covers, I just missed my gran sort of more than I had since she died, and kind of spent a day crying, and then it came out, and then it didn't, then it just felt so different. And I don't know if it will feel like that with every book. I'm sure the first child is different. And then I don't know if it's really been a frenzy of promoting. I keep being surprised by people still wanting to hear about it, or the fact that I could be lucky enough to be here this year talking about it. Some sort of thoughts that aren't really strung together, but...
Cool, thank you. I stumbled into writing fiction. I am mostly a poet, or consider myself a poet. But I got into the MA stream, into the fiction stream at MA, doing the MA, so I'm like, I guess I'm writing fiction now. And I want to acknowledge the invisible labor that it takes to write a book, all the support systems that you have to have, which you can't get any work done without, the people that are there to hear you, hear your frustrations, or cook meals for you, or do your washing, or just be there. So that's what I realized that you need to take to create any sort of work, which I hadn't realized before. And I also want to give a shout out to everyone on this panel helped with my work. Dinithi read the manuscript halfway through her PhD, and she was crazy busy, but she still took time to give me feedback. And Brad obviously was really instrumental. And same with Saraid. She was in the throes of writing her own book, and I would annoyingly send her massive chapters, and she would take the time to give me feedback. So yeah, that's what it takes to write something. You really need a community around you. And since it's come out, it's been overwhelming, I think, at times for me as a person who's quite private and prefers to be quite low-key. Last year was a year when I was quite out in the public, and I found that hard to deal with, but now I've come to terms with, where the book is at and how it has been received, and yeah, I'm in a good place with it.
Thanks, guys. And with each of your books, who were you writing for? And based on the reception you've gotten to your books, who has actually been reading it? Is there any overlap? Is there any difference?
You have a really interesting answer for this, eh? He does. I've heard him talk about it.
So my book is about a rise of a South Asian populist who works in and around Parliament and becomes a far-right grifter. So he's kind of inspired by a few people over in the UK and in America, so the likes of Suella Braverman or Vivek Ramaswamy or folks like that. And I have found this book interesting in terms of who's responded to it, and particularly there's kind of almost three categories of people who have really kind of engaged with it. One is Asian creatives, and I think there's a real sense of they can understand where this character comes from. They can see people like him within their communities, usually gone in different directions to where they are, but you can kind of easily see how that happens. Second has been journalists, because I think they have to deal with the very specific things that I talk about in the book quite frequently. And then the third, weirdly enough, is right-wing people who have kind of seemed to enjoy it. I think it's more the kind of, weirdly, the centre-right folks who are kind of irritated by the populist trends of certain politicians or certain kind of narratives, who have kind of responded to this weirdly enough. And I've got quite a few emails from people who are very engaged politically and have really liked it, which I find kind of interesting as well, because my book is basically about how the right wing doesn't really know what it stands for post the global financial crisis, because the economic ideas that it was that kind of orthodoxy basically got shot down with it, and so it's kind of drifted towards populism, and clearly Trump is an example of how far it can go. But it's also been largely ignored by the Pākehā literary scene, which I found kind of interesting with this book. And I think because it kind of goes quite... it was pretty unapologetic about what it writes about. And also the narratives aren't necessarily easy because they're not often... I think it's a relatively unusual novel in terms of subject matter, in terms of viewpoint, and that has also possibly meant that people may not quite have that kind of easy access point into it, which is fine. I tend to write for myself, and I now realise that my books don't all have to appeal to the person who likes Sodden, Downstream or Sprigs. They work in and of themselves, and as long as I'm kind of being true to that particular book, that's kind of the most important thing for me. But if people respond, then that's fantastic, and I hope that they do. But you can never really control it, I guess.
I found that so interesting after 8 books that, like, now with this one, you've hit a kind of different sector of people. That's so fascinating. was the question?
Who were you writing for?
Oh, yeah.
And was there any overlap or difference between who was actually receiving it?
Yeah, I don't think I really thought about who I was writing for, but I was incredibly insecure about South Asians reading my book because I just was so sure I would get things wrong and have some people in my family being like, actually. But I don't know if I could really have that in my mind too much while writing, because then I just wouldn't do anything. It would be kind of crippling, maybe. And then, I don't know, I think before your first book, can you even imagine that anyone's going to read it? I was just sort of like, we get to the end and then I'll deal with it. And then we got to the end, and then I think I didn't change some things that I thought I was going to change, and then they just stayed. But yeah, I don't know. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I can't tell whether you're just really good at reading the room, or you're just writing your story and that appeals to people. I had a strong sense of what I wanted to do with my work and what I didn't want to fall into. Basically, I didn't see my experience reflected on bookshelves in this country, and I thought I should just write towards that gap, especially the 1.5 migrant or the second generation migrant who, the way that we've been talked about in the past is tropes of finding your identity or reconnecting with your heritage, and I didn't necessarily want to fall into those tropes. Us 1.5 generation migrants, we're kind of in this in-between bit where we're really agile, really flexible, really adaptive, but that comes at a cost of personhood, a sense of self. And in my novel, the kind of premise is the protagonist loses his mother, and through that loses his language, loses his community, and basically what happens to a person when they don't have that, and where do they find that? I kind of had all those ideas at the start about what I wanted to speak to, just wrote towards that.
Cool, thanks guys. And because both you and Bran kind of referenced this a little bit, there's this phrase that gets thrown around a lot in our discussions of literature and media of needing people who look like me. What do you guys feel about that phrase? How do you guys feel about that phrase? Do you think it's an important part of these discussions? Do you not think it's an important part? What are your thoughts?
I'll speak more to Bran's work than my work. Is when I said he's done more to push the conversation forward, is through the work that he's been putting out, we've got to a point when we can have this vile South Asian protagonist, where I don't think you could have done that if you hadn't written Sprigs or Sodden Downstream. So, how do you think that conversation has shifted, or how has your freedom to express these kinds of ideas shifted?
One of the biggest influences in terms of my thinking was Stuart Hall, the cultural theorist, and he talked about breaking stereotypes, and he said it's not simply, if you've got a negative stereotype, you don't simply present a positive stereotype or positive depiction, because you're still working within a binary of good or versus bad. And his way of challenging representation is to have as many different characters as you can, because then you make the meanings elusive and slippery and therefore ultimately meaningless. And that's been a really big driver in terms of my writing, is to have as big a breadth of characters as I can who cover the kind of full spectrum of human experiences, as a way of therefore meaning to be South Asian or to be Sri Lankan is kind of meaningless. And I'm also trying to find out myself as part of this process as a writer. I'm a 1.5 like romesh. I came here when I was 3. I don't really have, particularly close connections to Sri Lanka apart from, I haven't been back since I was a child. So part of writing is also trying to problematize or challenge some of those kind of labels, I guess, that get ascribed to us.
Yeah, I find that a really cool question and a cool thing to think about. I think I'm quite cynical about like the usefulness of representation, or how far it can go. Like ultimate representation is this idea that simply by seeing ourselves or someone like us, we can achieve a new kind of safety or a new kind of acceptance or a new kind of, equity or something. I feel like I'm cynical about it, but I feel like it's a privilege to be cynical about it at this point in my life. Because sometimes I talk to people and they just feel so differently, and then I can understand why. And I do think that if I had kind of seen, if I had read Romesh's book when I was 14, that would have been quite life-changing, when I was stuck in Christchurch, sort of hating everything. I feel like maybe when I think about representation, I always think about this idea of like race-bent casting. So when you know how there's all these kind of Regency era TV shows being made. My mum has seen them all, and they do this thing quite often, or currently, where they will just cast, which theoretically they'll cast people of any sort of ethnicity in any sort of role, but it is almost always still POC playing the side characters and white people playing the main characters. And then it's also just this rehashing of the same stories, the same kind of Jane Austen, movies, whatever, again and again and again. And it's sort of, that feels to me like such a good example of like giving people a crumb of something without actually changing any real ideas. And then sometimes I'm also like, does it make history seem less evil? Like, does it stitch some weird sort of healing thing over colonization for people? Like, do people watch that and feel less guilty? I don't know. I think a lot about TV shows because when I'm at my mum's, that is always on TV. No shade.
Representation. I think that the idea of community is both flawed and necessary. And when I think about us as Sri Lankan writers, last year 3 Sri Lankan writers put out a book, which has never happened in this country, and it does feel like it feels like when the iPod first came out. It was, first generation type thing. So we might be pushing the conversation forward, but I'm excited about the people that are going to come up after this, and we're going to look back and see how silly it was to, coordinate a literary festival based on ethnicity. Like, this is what I mean by first generation iPod. Like, this is just feels like the start. Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. Is like, in light of all of this, what do you think about this configuration of this panel, where we are all here with a shared heritage, kind of talking about literature and your books? Do you prefer this configuration, or do you think a different configuration of people, of writers, would be, better or more interesting?
I think different panels pick up different things in the books, and I think there's probably things that we haven't been asked and that we might like to talk about, and we might not get the same opportunity because we are the first. We're not, but do you know what I mean? Like, because it's more unusual or something. But this, yeah, I think just, different panels would bring up different things. I love being asked about craft and talking about other writers who write in ways that I admire, regardless of where they're from. And I think there have been times when that hasn't been something I've been called upon to discuss, maybe.
I personally love us all being here up on stage. I think it's really special, and if a younger version of me in the audience was seeing me or us, I'd be wowed and I'd be inspired. And I think, like, obviously a part of me feels like, me and Saraid have done a few talks together now, and we're such completely different writers. Same with Brannavan. Our books have not super heaps in common.
Me and Romesh always talk about how we feel about plot, and we feel so different.
We have a polar opposite response to plot and form, and I love that. Yeah.
Explain, expand.
I don't know, sometimes I'll pick up a book and I'll be like, no plot, Romesh would love this.
Yeah.
It's purely vibes.
Yeah. Should we? I mean, I think I love how different we approach writing, and how our backgrounds. Brand's is a lawyer. Saraid's in theatre, mine in cooking. We need to celebrate that more and make that more of a thing of how different our points of view are, rather than homogenizing our books because they're Sri Lankan.
Yeah, I kind of waver with the idea on whether I like it or not, but mostly I do like it. I think of when I started as a writer, the thought of me being up here on stage with 3 other Sri Lankan writers would have been mind-blowing to me, and to be in a position where now there are 3 other writers who I admire that I'm now on a stage with is pretty cool. But I also don't like being limited to my identity. I want to talk about craft. I want to talk about how I've put together a book, or the ideas, or things like that, while also, but also I'm proud of my heritage, proud of my identity, but I'm also still figuring that out. And the thing hopefully that people will kind of get to know is how different our books are, how different our writing is, which then I guess adds to my earlier point about, the more of us you hear from, or the more of us you see, the more complex those definitions become.
Perfect. Well, I have a question for you, Bran, about craft, which begins with, I came prepared. It begins with my hatred for your character, Kartik. He's so unpleasant to be with for long periods of time. Why did you write him like this? Not as an accusation. Why did you write him like this? Why was that necessary? Particularly in that he is participating in this political world, and he has all these snarky comments about people and bills and whatever that were actually affecting people's lives at the time. What was going through your mind writing a character like that in actually such a significant space?
I was trying to capture a voice of someone who is using words to insulate his own behaviour, or to wipe his slate clean. And this is someone who's writing, and it's not too much of a spoiler, he's writing in 2024, looking back at his kind of life. And I had the voice, as a lawyer, one of the things you sometimes see if you're particularly in litigation space is you see transcripts of people talking, and when they're being cross-examined, they often ramble, and they often lose a little bit of form, they lose a little bit of their thread, and they sometimes circle back. And I want to kind of capture that kind of voice for a guy who feels some sense of guilt about what he's done, but not entirely. I was also influenced by Nabokov and Lolita. I clearly don't write in the beauty that Nabokov can craft a sentence, but I wanted to have the sense of a voice that keeps circling back, keeps undermining itself, will say something and then say something completely different. So you never really know where its moral centre is, and throughout the book you never really go, does he believe in what he's doing, or is he just merely an opportunist? But for some reason, this guy's voice was just so deeply embedded in my brain that it just came out. And then I'm someone who edits heaps, so I would do between 30 to 40 edits of a book, and that kind of George Saunders approach of the more you kind of reread something, the more you can craft it in a particular way. And I used humour quite purposefully in this book. Well, hopefully it's funny. I think it's a funny book, where you can kind of also use jokes to get the reader to then just go, oh yeah, maybe he's actually not that bad a person, while at the same time kind of manipulating the reader to kind of push the reader towards his thoughts, and that kind of Overton window idea where you make terrible ideas more and more accessible. Clearly, there's a strong moral reason in the book and a strong morality in the book, I think, but that's what I was trying to do to readers.
Nice. And he starts working for the party around 2003, was it? 2002?
Around in the Don Brash era.
Okay, yeah, okay. So my next question is, if you were writing a character who's just gotten out of university and is about to start working for this government, would you write him in the same way?
Well, I think one of the arguments I was making in the book is that the current government is following that trajectory of the right not really knowing what it stands for. And so I think if he was coming out now, then he would already be kind of an incel. I think a lot of young men in particular who... because I went through uni and school with people who kind of were anti-authoritarian, and they'd kind of figured out ways to be, get a reaction from folks, and but it wasn't anywhere near as what it's like now. If you're a young man trying to get a reaction out of people, you tend to be pretty aggressively incel in terms of your approach, and so I think that might come on a bit too strong as a character. So I wanted someone who kind of slowly becomes corrupted, where he's a little bit passive. And in my head, he was a classic kind of immigrant kind of character in the sense that he's, on the one hand, he's passive. He just lets things happen to him. But he's also a bit of a hustler because he wants to be liked and he wants to be popular. And that kind of tension that a lot of immigrants go through, I think also drives him as a person.
Yeah, I mean, one of the themes that kind of came through with his racialized social rejection was also about his masculinity and his sense of masculinity. And I kind of also found that a theme in your book too, Romesh, except that grief became the vehicle for that in my reading of it. And I wanted to ask if you think, if South Asian masculinities were something you were kind of keeping in mind when you were writing that, and if not, why do you think that emerged for me?
Yeah, 100%. I don't tell people this, but I tell you now, the book is for men, and it's for healing men. I'm of the bell hooks school where, I think men need healing, and especially young men and boys. And yeah, I wanted to explore mostly through the person that comes into the shop, and for context, this person opens a noodle shop. It's going horribly, and halfway through, a person comes into the shop and takes over the narrative, and they go on this big spiel, and he's a horrendously racist, toxic, masked man, but underneath all of that, there's a lot of hurt, and I wanted to show that. I wanted every male character in the novel to have some sort of redemption, whether it's like small or profound. The father figure comes back, and he kind of redeems himself a little bit. And Devendra, he's trying to the protagonist. He's trying to figure out his version of masculinity, and it constantly comes into question through a horrendous one-night stand hookup that he has, through his interaction with another male colleague that he works with. But I didn't think I could leave the reader with just that, with just showing how men could be horrible. I needed to give them a way out, or, not kind of tie it up loosely so that it's cheesy, but just show that there is the possibility for change for men.
Nice, thank you. And Saraid, one of the major themes in your book is obviously queerness. And I wanted to know what was going through your mind when you were writing your book to make sure you were empowering that theme and not tokenizing it in any way.
I read this book called Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler when I was, I think it maybe quite at the start of writing Amma, and that is a really, really amazing book, which is kind of set in mostly like San Francisco in, I think, the 90s. It's such a cool book. It's about a person who can like change their gender and change their literal form. And it is so interested in the queer people that are around this protagonist. It really kind of, I think queer people are really good at, we're really good at like categorizing our community in like a way that is pretty funny to read about and very like kind of for us, by us. But because something I really noticed in Paul is how like Paul's just looking at these other people and like running them down kind of thing. But it made me really think about the queer people around me in Tamaki, like my friends, and I don't know, how we speak to each other or how we identify each other, how we dress. So kind of in there, like a few times in Amma where the youngest character, Annie, the youngest generation of the book, there's a couple moments where she's in groups of queer people. There's like this self-defense group that she runs, and then there's this scene in a club in London. And I think, just having in my mind how we recognise each other and how we interact with each other based on those recognitions, and what like are kind of little giveaways that are very specific to us, and also how hard it is to be, or how maybe tiring or claustrophobic it is to kind of be queer in a city as small as Auckland after a while. I don't know, like if you're going to write about queerness now, and if it's going to be happening here, that is always going to be part of it, I think. So feeling really invested or interested in the people around me, I think, was helpful for that,
And you were recently in South Asia for a couple of festivals, including in Sri Lanka for Goal Lit Fest. What kinds of conversations were you having about queerness while you were there?
Yeah, I actually did a panel on kind of queer identities with Shyam Salvadorai and an activist called Rosanna. So with one writer, one Sri Lankan writer, and one Sri Lankan political activist, she's like very much at the forefront of LGBTQ plus rights there. Super different focus, super different way of talking about it to us here. And also, obviously, activists are going to be different to writers. Like, she's putting her body kind of on the line every day, or she was for most of her career. She's a bit older now. We were having discussions about... There was a really good audience question about how, like, diasporic people can help queer people at home in Sri Lanka, which I found really like beautiful and interesting. And the answer was kind of like, you can't. You have to keep doing it where you are and let us do it where we are because we know our context better, which I thought was amazing. And yeah, it did feel different. It felt different to talk about it in that space. Also, just I'm read so differently there than I am here, so that's also something that, yeah. Well, most Sri Lankans think I'm white, so they're sort of like, okay, when I start talking about it, I think which obviously affects how they interact with me, or if they're going to have a discussion about queerness with me.
How does that make you feel?
It used to make me feel a way when I was younger, and now it doesn't really. It's just is what it is, yeah.
Why do you think that's changed?
I think it's changed because I know myself more, and I'm not trying to prove my Sri Lankanness to myself. I think it changed because I wrote a book about my family, and in doing so I understood them in relation to me more, and I understood what I'm capable of talking about and what I know nothing about. I think it changed. I don't know how to say this, but race is contextual. Like, you are read differently in different spaces, and beauty standards change quite a lot. I think lip fillers have changed how people read women of colour. I'm not kidding. Like, if there's a lot of people with lips that they weren't born with, the whole spectrum of beauty changes. I don't know. I have a lot of thought. I don't know if I want to go too deep on that.
Do you guys have any reflections on that?
I think, like, touching on that...
Not the lip fillers, but the...
I have no comment on lip fillers, I'm sorry. No hot take. Coming to terms with my Sri Lankanness is a big thing. Like, that has been a journey, and I experienced that in my past life as a chef, where I used to put on Sri Lankan pop-ups, and it was people from my community that were the most critical, and it was like, okay, yeah, I can't cook like my auntie does or my grandma does, but I'm trying, or like, this is my version of what Sri Lankan food is. And it was hard to come to terms with that. It's a bitter pill to swallow when you're trying to reach out to your community, but it's not your community that shows up first. That's been my journey with it.
Did you think that you would be able to? Like, when you started cooking, did you think there were things you would be able to recreate just because you knew technically, like, how to?
Well, the thing is, I didn't know how technically. I was approaching it from a Western point of view because that's what I knew. Like, in Sri Lankan food, you go about it in a completely different way, where you just do things that are counterintuitive. You don't simmer meats very slowly for a very long time. You just crank it up and like boil the heck out of it. And, you know, that's like, to do that with a Western mindset is really hard. And I think there's a good metaphor in that in terms of how I approach writing or how I approach my identity. It's a process of unlearning.
I do also, sorry, one more thing about food. I do also think that like this idea of being here and making it taste like it does there is always impossible, because we don't have the I don't know, the temperature outside isn't the same, so the food tastes different when you put it in your mouth. Like, it's so, yeah, it's never going to work. Even the ingredients aren't the...
It's not, but it doesn't stop people from trying, because even if it's like a facsimile or it has like some sort of hits something in your brain that reminds you of the real thing, that's kind of what people are going for.
But I think that's the nature of identity anyway. Everyone is kind of doing their best impersonation of what it means to be a particular person or a particular group or a particular label, irrespective of what your identity is. And I think it took me a while to realise that too, that there is no one perfect way of being a Sri Lankan Tamil. There's no one perfect way of being Sri Lankan, or no one perfect way of being a man. All of those kind of labels can be a weight if you kind of think too hard about it. But if you kind of appreciate its kind of complexity, then that's, as a writer, it's a really great space to be in. I mean, I think about my first book had a Sri Lankan protagonist, but it was kind of accidental, because it was pretty much an autobiographical book about this very chaotic trip I did through North and West Africa. So I don't really count that book. But my second, third, and fourth books they were about race and they're about class and things like that, but they didn't have Sri Lankan protagonists. And in hindsight, I kind of go, should I have written Sri Lankan protagonists, or was this me kind of finding space or trying to avoid writing about Sri Lankan matters? And I'm not sure. It possibly was, but also it was a way of me of testing my ideas out in ways that I'm actually really proud of. But it was Sodden, Downstream, and Sprigs, which then featured kind of Sri Lankan protagonists, which gave me the confidence to keep going and get a sense of, actually, I am Sri Lankan. I can write about some of this stuff, even if it's people within a New Zealand context, rather than necessarily writing about a Sri Lankan in Sri Lanka, apart from that little section in Sodden Downstream.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I'll just ask a couple more questions, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes to open it to the floor. So kind of on the back of like thinking about ourselves as Sri Lankans, but also, you guys have just written these books, gone through, for you guys, it's your first book. It's a pretty big moment in your life, if not one of the biggest. What has that been like, going through this exceptional moment, or just another moment, during a genocide, where you have gone through this publishing process and promoting process, while at the same time in other parts of the world, people's normal lives are being devastated, decimated, and that devastation being denied? Have you sat with that?
I found it tough. It's easy to fall down the way of thinking of, this is petty and futile, and I should be putting my energy towards something a bit more productive. And yeah, there was a point where I had lost a sense of lost faith in the arts as a way to lost faith in the arts as a form of activism, and I got quite burnt out. And what I realized was that for me to be the most effective through an ongoing genocide, I have to be at full energy, at full capacity. And with me feeling burnt out and frustrated, it's not helping anyone. And what I've kind of realized in the past couple of months is that it's okay to take time out to replenish, to heal yourself, because when you do come back, you are so much more effective. And what has really helped is rather than sitting at home and being angry and frustrated, to educate myself, to read Palestinian poets, and to read works of art by other people who are a lot smarter than me and a lot more articulate than me. And I found that really has been filling my cup. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
My book was in part in response. Well, there's a kind of fury about the impotence of liberalism in the face of what was happening in Palestine, and I thought about what happened in Sri Lanka before that, and I thought about all the other kind of horrors that have happened in the 21st century, and so I wrote this book in part to. Well, satire can mock, and satire can also attack the building blocks of some of these narratives, and that's what I wanted to do with this book. I wanted to show, yes, people are dangerous, but they're also idiots, and they're also reckless and stupid, and you can kind of mock, if you mock them at the kind of granular level, then you can kind of undermine them as a structure, which is what I kind of set out to do with this book. But my next project is something which, because it is also something I'm thinking about as to how do you build solidarity, because Kartik Popat is not a book about solidarity. But my next book is, I'm writing a sequel to Sodden, Downstream, but I'm thinking about tradies and how they can build in ways in which people can come together for something where they are otherwise disparate, as a way of thinking about how do we respond to some of the challenges that we are absolutely facing. But I agree with that kind of discomfort that Romesh had about, is art futile in this space? And it certainly is not the same as activism, and certainly not as effective as activism, but it is. It does play a role, I suppose, in changing some of the language around how we can think about these matters.
I've been really inspired by how many writers have been so staunch in response to the escalation of Israel's genocide in Palestine. Like, there have been so many writers I've seen who have just taken very deliberate positions and stuck to it and used every opportunity that is presented to them as ways to continue drawing attention to what Israel is still doing. Like Jhumpa Lahiri recently, rejected or refused to accept an award from, I think it was a gallery in New York that was presented to her because they fired some of their workers for protesting the genocide. Obviously, Arundhati Roy is like constantly out here. Then there's like fossil-free books, and there's also a movement of writers in the UK to try and get the Society of Authors to, which is like a primarily kind of UK-focused union, to like abide more consistently or to boycott Israeli institutions more consistently. So I think that releasing a book at this time has maybe not put me in conversation, but has allowed me to look around in a different way and wonder, like, to try and also kind of apply that same rigor to myself. Like, do I want to appear on a panel with an Israeli writer who, after this long, hasn't said anything about what Israel's still doing? No, I don't, so I will refuse to be in that space. And if I'm presenting something, is there opportunity to like share a donation link, which feels like doing nothing, but if I'm up there on stage, why wouldn't I be doing, that? So yeah, I think that I've been really I've seen people be really deliberate about it. People who are also writers has helped me to think about all of the times when I need to be as deliberate and as consistent.
That was all beautiful. Thank you, guys. And just for my last question to ground that conversation and also our whole conversation tonight, this afternoon, what are our responsibilities as tangata tiriti and as writers to te tiriti or waitangi?
I mean, I think it's pretty critical. I mean, I think maybe as immigrants, you're far more conscious that it's not your land. And so we don't, I guess we also don't have the difficulty or hang-ups that people who have been here a few generations might have in order to be able to recognise that fact. But it's quite easy for me as someone who moved here at 3 to kind of say, well, clearly this land was, and I'm not tangata whenua, I never will be, and I will never lay claim to that. I mean, as a lawyer, I work in the treaty space, so it's something that I'm deeply conscious of, and work towards kind of assisting Crown and local authorities be better treaty partners. So in my day-to-day experience, I kind of have to deal with it and engage with it. As a writer, though, I think it's also something that is critical, and if you want to write about Aotearoa, then it has to be a fundamental acknowledgement.
I think historically, minority groups in this country have been pitted against each other, and people of the generation before me don't see the missed opportunity to be good allies. And I kind of talk about this in the book where, a brown person gets criticised for because she gets chosen to sing the national anthem at a rugby game, and part of the critique is like, that should be an Indigenous person, or do they think you're an Indigenous person? But yeah, I think there needs to be more solidarity built within our community with tangata whenua, and yeah, that's kind of where my energy is focused on.
Yeah, I think that as South Asians or as Asian people, we need to make sure that our community is not actively being brainwashed as soon as they get here, because I think that National and ACT are extremely deliberate about targeting new migrants, especially like model minority, groups, to try and make, for their own ends. So I think that we need to be really conscious about the ways, like what we do and don't let slide, and how we speak to one another.
Thanks, guys. Tim is kindly letting us have time for one question.
Hi, you guys. So my question is a bit philosophical, let's say, and it has to do, and political. So I am Greek originally. I sailed to New Zealand in 1995. I have New Zealand citizenship now, but like you say, I will always feel like a grateful guest to this land. My question has to do a lot with where we are today in the world, with the rise of fascism and autocracy, the kind of pretty scary reality of catastrophic climate change and the extra amount of wars and refugees that are going to exist in that, and our identities also in the immigrant experience. And by that I mean, I'm 60 years old, so when I started sailing on Greenpeace boats in the early 90s, the big power of us was that we were people from all over the world fighting for everyone all over the world. And we would put our lives on the line for everywhere all over the world. And it feels to me now that we are amongst each other, the good guys, let's say, if I can be very simplistic, fighting each other over our skin color, for example, or our issues that are dividing us at a time when we need to be together. And I am wondering how you all might see as a possibility that we, also immigrants, can help us all dive under the ocean waves to connect with each other deeper than our differences. While celebrating our cultural differences, how can we dive under there to hold hands with each other? Because these things are dangerous at the moment.
I mean, one thing I would say is, the fact that all of you are here and hearing Sri Lankan voices is a sign that is one of the things that I think is great. It's listening to other voices, hearing other voices, not taking up space or putting yourself into the centre, and then figuring out points of commonality, I think is a pretty critical way in which people can build solidarity. I think one of the things, identity politics is kind of the critique at the moment, but I think one of the things that's really important is people need to be able to identify themselves as they wish, but also in a way that's not at the expense of other people. And it's finding ways in which we can do that to face some of these challenges that you say are obviously pretty burning and pressing now is critical. How you go about it is hard work, but one of the things that I guess as writers we can do is we work in language, and one of the things I'm particularly conscious of is as a Tamil, I am well aware of what happened in Sri Lanka, of how language is the first tool used to oppress people, because if you can dehumanize people through language, then it makes it easier to commit violence against them. And so as writers, one thing we can do is refuse to allow that to happen, and show the limits of some of those kind of techniques. But it's a lot of work, but it's also making sure that we think hard about how we approach everything that we do.
I guess the reason why I'm also asking this is because as a Greek person, I grew up after World War II. There was a civil war in Greece. We killed more of each other than the German Nazis. After that, we had a dictatorship. I grew up in a dictatorship. So my parents were lawyers. They died when we were young, but they fought for the beginning of the EU or the UN, or how do we all get together in the world? And now I am finding myself going to places, and this time when I got back in New Zealand in 2019, where I am seen as a white-skinned colonizer by people. And I think these kind of weird plays in language that I find almost lazy make things so challenging in how we can rise together against fascism, you know.
I think it comes back to intersectionality, and for a long time I was disgruntled about how I was prejudiced against for being a brown man, and I was very vocal about that, but I was ignoring the side of power that I have of, being cis or being heterosexual. And so it was a process of being true, or having an honest conversation with myself of yeah, in some ways I am a minority, but in other ways I am very much a majority and hold a lot of power. And how do I come to terms with that relationship? Or what am I going to do with that power? So I think an intersectional approach is the best way forward.
I think it's also okay to be uncomfortable and feel discomfort about some of the privileges you have, because I think that also then, exactly what Romesh was saying, as a male cis heterosexual man, I have a lot more privileges in certain areas that I might not have. Or if I can walk home at night and not worry about it. I can't go through an airport as easily. There's those different things kind of operate, and so leaning into some of that privilege and accepting it can also help, and then that also means that you can cede some space and let other people kind of take some of that space by knowing, okay, fine, I don't need to have a voice in this particular moment.
We might. Before we fully wrap, I just want to say thank you so much for your questions and for doing this with us.
Thank you, guys.
It was so, that
Round
was
of
so
applause
great.
for Dinithi.
For coming and listening. I knew it was going to be an awesome chat because I get to chat with these guys all the time. So I was really excited to invite you all into that. And so I hope you enjoyed it, that you felt challenged, that you had a nice time. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.